Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing a Dead by Daylight Survivor tier list. Now quite a while back I made a killer tier list video, and that did pretty well. Even though some of the comments were a bit, well, you know. So I decided to do one on the Survivor side. Since the survivors don't have their own unique abilities, we're just going to be basing them off of their 3 unique perks. And for the love of God, understand something. This is my opinion, so if I get any backlash, then fine. Now bear in mind that I don't have Jeff, Ash, Leon and Jill, so I'm just going to be basing the rankings of those characters based off of what I've heard. And starting off this tier list we have Jeff. Jeff on paper sounds okay, but based off what I've heard, he's not popular. Breakdown is essentially a B-Tech version of Babysitter, Guardian, and Aftercare is basically a B-Tech version of Bond. Distortion sounds like the best perk out of these 3, mainly because if the killer has Lethal Pursuer or Barbecue and Chili, Nurse's Calling, things like that, you would know. Next up we have Yunjin. Yunjin arguably has one of the worst exhaustion perks in the game because you have to stun the killer before it activates. Self-preservation is almost a waste of time, I'd say. I mean, it's very situational, along with fast track if all the survivors are getting hooked and you so happen to hit a great skill check. I don't know, I just feel like Yunjins are very situational. Next up we have Ash. Ash's perks are mainly useless. Metal of Man is, I mean, probably the best one out of the 3, but it does waste a lot of time. Buckle Up and Flip Flop are just plain useless. Next up we have Ace. The only good perk I'd say Ace has is Open-Handed, but on its own it literally does nothing. And Up the Ante literally just helps you get off the hook the first time, and even then I wouldn't recommend doing that. Ace in the Hole is basically telling you go look for a chest and waste a minute of your time. And then, moving up a tier, we have Zarina. Now, I have Zarina, but I never play as her. Off the record, does nothing. Red Herring just seems like a way to confuse the killer, which can be fun, but I don't feel like it would work well for me. And I don't know how to feel with further people, because if you're going to give a survivor a free health state, you're basically wasting your own life. Now, I really hate to put Steve this low on the list, but he doesn't have good perks. Babysitter used to be really bad, but they made it somewhat better, but it's still not a good replacement for Borrow Time. Second Wind and Camaraderie, yes, I'm calling them by their original name. They're both very situational, and I would not recommend using them, just at all. You could use something better. Next up we have Leon, and like I said before, I do not have him, so I cannot judge this properly. Bite the Bullet isn't that good because most people just do tend to go away from the killer as far as possible and then heal. Flashbang, I will say, does look pretty fun. Rookie Spirit might come in clutch if the killer kicks a generator that's nearly done, or if the killer has Ruin, which, I mean, it could be alright, but you might be better off using something else. Next up we have Quentin. Wake Up just seems like a good perk for solo queue. Pharmacy, I don't know what to say about it. I don't know if it's bad or if it's good, because you're guaranteed a medkit and you open chests faster. And then Vigil is very good if other survivors are within you, and it really depends on what exhaustion perk you have. I think the problem with Quentin is that not many people play him. Well, I mean, apart from Will. But other than that, he's not played as often. Kate has okayish perks. Dance With Me, you can confuse the killer slightly. But then you have Windows Opportunity, which can be good for beginners. And then Boil Over. No. Yuri's perks sound good on paper, but not all of them are great. But Lucky Break is very good and very underrated. You can waste a lot of the killer's time if you just keep running once you're injured, because he won't leave any scratch marks, so the killer might not know where you went. Any Means Necessary sounds good on paper, but realistically, you're not going to use it as much. To me, Jane only has Head On. Her other perks are useless, so don't even bother. I feel like Tap's perks are a bit underrated. For instance, Technicity is good for if you want to escape the killer and recover at the same time. I did just explain what the perk does. And then you have Detective's Hunch, which is actually really good if you use it properly. You can literally see everything. And then Stakeout. Like, what even is that? Alright, now, moving up a tier, we have Johan. And just to be clear, the tier maker website that I used to make this tier list did not have a picture of Johan, so let me just do that for you. There we go. His perks are pretty good, but I've never actually managed to use the one that prevents people from failing skill checks, because that's just never happened to me. And I've just realised while I'm editing this video, I've been saying his name wrong, so sorry. Next up we have Nia. Nia, beside being a toxic twat, she actually has somewhat decent perks. Balance Landing obviously being the best one, and Urban Evasion decent, but streetwise, no. Next up, we have Elide. Elide has some pretty fun perks. With Power Struggle, I feel like you have to be extremely lucky that the killer will have to go through a pallet while carrying you, whilst you're at 30-25% wiggle progression. And then Deception is just a really fun perk. And then Appraisal, you can basically just get more of a chest, essentially. I'm literally putting Lori up here because of Decisive Strike. Her other perks, no. I mean, Objective Accession is actually decent. Next up, we have Jill. And starting with Counterforce, it's really good for finding hexes and even Noed. Blast Mine is just really good for fucking around with the killer. And then Resurgence is basically an upgraded version of one of Jane's perks. I feel like most people would just get Jake for Iron Will, but Saboteur and Calm Spirit aren't that bad. For one, Saboteur makes you see all the hooks around the carried survivor, which is really good if you want to sabotage. And then Calm Spirit, well, it's not the best stealth perk, but it's decent. With Cheryl, I never really understood how she worked properly. Well, I mean, with Soul Guard, it's basically just borrowed time, but for instantly healing people. Blood Pack is pretty good, but it's not good if you're in solo queue, because they won't follow you. And then Repressed Alliance, I don't see any use of it. It's literally a one-use thing, and it blocks the generator for you to repair. I don't see a use in it, honestly. Dwight probably has some of the most basic perks in the game. For instance, Bond, you can just see other people around you, which is genuinely just really good. And then Proof Thyself just makes you repair generators faster, and also extra blood points. And Leader is basically a Proof Thyself, but for unhooking and opening exit gates. So it's not bad. I don't know whether to say Diversion or Deliverance is better than the other, because with Deliverance you can pretty much guarantee an unhook from yourself, but you have to get a safe unhook before that happens, and if you're the first one to get killed, then that perk is done. And with Diversion you have to be near the killer, but when it works, it's pretty satisfying. And Auto Dictate, don't even bother. Moving up in tier, we have Fang. Fang has Lithe, which is another good exhaustion perk for if you want to waste more of the killer's time. And then Alert basically gives you an indication of when the killer is breaking a generator or a pallet, which they do tend to do that a lot, so you'll know where the killer is. And then Technician isn't as good, but it's good for beginners. Now, some would argue that Felix should be going in the B tier, but Visionary is good for beginners. Built to Last basically triples your duration of your item, and Desperate Measures is severely underrated. It's basically the reverse version of Genetophobia. The main reason that Nancy is up in A tier is because of Inner Strength. And then Self-Aware is just good for new beginners and experienced players, because you can see your own scratch marks and you can fool the killer pretty easily with that. And then Situational Awareness isn't terrible, but not the best either. Now, David has the best perk in the game, a somewhat decent perk, and the worst perk in the game. The best perk obviously being Dead Hard, we all know that. The decent perk being We're Gonna Live Forever, basically gives you 3 blood points, and No Mither. Just don't even try with No Mither. There's no way you can redeem yourself if you have No Mither. You are fucked. And then we have the best of the best, starting off with Bill. Bill has 2 meta perks, that being Borrowed Time and Unbreakable. Borrowed Time is just a really good perk to have at all times, because the killer will most likely be trying to tunnel the other person. If you have Unbreakable, and if the killer's trying to slug everyone, or even if you have Decisive Strike ready to go, it's just really good. But Left Behind is obviously one of the worst perks in the game, because it literally relies on you being the last survivor, and nowadays where the hatch literally only spawns when one survivor is left, it's not good. Michaela's perks quite literally give an advantage to the survivors. What I mean by that is the introduction of the boon totems, one of which being you can heal yourself as long as you're near the totem's range, and as a killer main, I'm very annoyed by it. It won't matter if the killer breaks the totem or like snuffs the totem or whatever, you can literally go up and re-enable the perks again. And I guess the same thing applies for Jonah with his exponential perk, except it's just not as good as Michaela's. Now, when editing the video, I decided that Claudette is slightly worse than Meg. I'll talk about why. Claudette overall has some really good perks. She has good information, she has increased healing, she can even heal herself. The downside with healing yourself is that it takes half the time it would for someone else to heal you. Some would argue that it's probably a good thing, because all the survivors are probably either in a chase or doing a gen, or doing something important. But then we have Meg, who I think has the best perks collectively in the game. Adrenaline has gotten me out of so many situations, you'd be surprised. And then Quick and Quiet is probably the best stealth perk, I will say. Alright, well that's gonna do it for today's video. And in case you were wondering, The background footage was meant to be a separate video, but it did turn out to be pretty shit, so I decided to put it as background footage for this video. And here's a part where Sam screams on lungs out.
Go there. Go there.
Thank you, Sam. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video.